Hello, Astrid Erll. You have so many titles, which I think more than reading your resume and something very long and formal. I always ask my guests to talk about themselves because this is so much more meaningful. And you have done, well, all your nobiliary titles show how much you have done. And it's a great pleasure for me to talk to you finally and get some of your knowledge from memory studies, which is your main field and which I find very, very interesting. And I'm sure anybody who's listening to us will also identify with this because everybody relies on memory for so many things. So thank you for talking to me and to our audience, and welcome to Voices. And yeah, just why don't we start like a little bit at the beginning? So you are German, you were born where, and what's like kind of your history a little bit, please?
Okay. So thank you, Rebecca. I am German. I was born in Western Germany, which is relevant to say because when I was born, there still existed two Germanys. And I witnessed the fall of the German Wall when I was 16, 17. But I come from an area between Frankfurt and Cologne. And I studied English and German because I was always into literature. And when I did that, I studied to become a teacher. And that meant at that time that I had to take a minor in psychology. And I had a small module on cognitive psychology, which was all about memory in the mind. So I had this, in many ways, completely unhumanistic, unliterary studies take on memory on board and found it very interesting. And at the same time, at the university where I was at that time, is a small town near Frankfurt called Gießen. They were all very much into cultural memory studies because cultural memory was an emerging trend or idea or concept in Germany in the 1990s. And the reasons are manifold. First of all, for Germany, you must always consider the role of the Holocaust, and that German society forgot, denied, repressed their involvement in the Nazi time.
It was taboo, yeah.
It was taboo, it could not be talked about, and Nazi elites were still very much around. So that happened for several decades. Then Holocaust memory became basically emerged more and more since the late 70s, also through media. And that's something that's, of course, striking for me or for everyone who works in literary and media studies, that the trigger, the catalyst for broader society is sometimes political speeches and sometimes historiographical works, but very often it's a film like Schindler's List or a miniseries like Holocaust that came out in 1978.
Which traveled around the globe.
Came out in the United States. And also there, when I read the work by colleagues, I realize also in the United States, got Jewish survivor families speaking. Suddenly they could talk, and there was, on the social level, a tellability, so that people thought this is a story. It's a story worth listening to. And similar things happened in Germany, that in the sense that the topic of the Holocaust suddenly became more opened up and basically migrated into the public sphere. So from then on, you have also more and more literature addressing it. You have more and more research. You have more and more attempts at embedding the topic into the educational system and into the university system.
It became politically correct?
First of all, I would say it became present.
Okay.
And the reason why I say this is that I am an analytical memory researcher, and only in a second instance a normative one. First of all, I observe a memory that had been, some would say, disabled or dormant or covered up, suddenly emerges. And it's in the public sphere. And in the public sphere, many things happen with it. Some people are happy just to talk. Others are happy to listen. Others are happy to, to be writing successful novels.
Or to paint.
To paint.
Or pictures.
So there are psychological uses, there are social uses, there are artistic, aesthetic uses, monetary uses. You can make money with Holocaust films. And then there are political uses. And when you say it became politically correct, you probably refer to the German culture of memory, which emerged in the late 90s, early 2000s, with its big commemoration projects. No?
Yes.
That then made Germany famous in the world as the so-called championship of remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
And that really became something like a mainstream memory culture across Germany. With many also fantastic projects that were both top down by the politicians or on a national scale, but also wonderful bottom up projects like the stumbling stones, the Stolpersteine, and other things all over Germany. Because in Germany, wherever you look or wherever you dig, you find traces of Nazism.
Yes.
Of course. Yeah.
Which is captivating because it's it brings things that happened 80 years ago, like live in the present.
Absolutely. No? And we are sitting here in the so-called IG Farben building, which is our university's building, and which has an interesting and very palimpsestic history.
Yes.
Was built in the 1920s in order to host a chemical industry conglomerate, which then in the 1930s became involved in the Nazi regime and then set up a camp near Auschwitz, the Buna camp, and had Jewish and other workers there working them to death, basically. So that's part of the structure in which we are sitting. And I think that's a very German constellation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how much do you think it has this revival of the Holocaust discourse? How much would it have to do with generations going by? So it's at first it was, I'm sure, terribly painful even to talk about the Holocaust, and people could not emotionally deal with it. But then, so the children of the survivors were born and grew up a little bit. So now it's the second generation, and then the third one came. So does this have to do with allowing memories to emerge?
Absolutely. Generationality is extremely important, and intergenerational dynamics. What does your grandmother tell you or chooses not to tell you? How do third generations try to recover or uncover what happened to first generations? There are different generation models in memory theory. So, for example, there is Marianne Hirsch, who speaks about post-memory and who says if parents went to highly traumatizing histories like the Holocaust, then they often will not or cannot convey these stories in a straightforward way to their children. I mean, who could? And what they often transmit non-consciously are certain behaviors, fragments of a history that, however, is never narrated coherently. And Marianne Hirsch found that as a second generation survivor, she felt that she was overwhelmed by these memory fragments of her parents, which were extremely important for her own identity, and almost felt as if it was her own memory, but it was a hazy one because it was just here and there and fragmented. And this, for example, this post-memory constellation is something that you find among Holocaust survivors worldwide, but you also find post-memories of the Armenian genocide or of Indian partition and the many, many people who were killed or raped there. So it seems to be a generational memory dynamics that comes after highly traumatic histories.
Because these events shape people, or countries, regions, or whatever, no, and it carries out through time.
Yes, the memories shape you yourself, your family, and your entire context. And then it depends. In Germany, the constellation was often that the grandparents implicated in the Nazi regime. Most Germans, of course, were. It was not the Nazi Holocaust, it was the German Holocaust, as far as I'm concerned. Then those parents or grandparents often not speaking or trying to hush up their involvement. Then the second generation could sometimes be the 1968 generation who were working against their parents and tried to shed basically their influence and to critically inquire into their histories. And then you often have third generations who then grow up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, who inquire in a new way now that the history has further receded. And that, interestingly, is a plot pattern for many, many family sagas. Yeah.
And I understand, of course, the magnitude of the Second World War makes this event so strong and so far-reaching. But what happens when, I can think of, for example, there's a Roman settlement very near here that I visited, and it was a little bit like in the first 100 years after the birth of Christ. And it shows very advanced civilization with great knowledge on tools, on materials, on political organization, on army power, on the, and if you check a map, it talks about very far reach of an empire.
Yeah.
And so you know this place, of course. So it really talks about something very important. How does this also impact our memories and the shaping of Germany in the present day?
Absolutely. So the world of cultural memory is, of course, much larger than the recent genocides and traumatic histories. There is a cultural memory of the First World War. That is incidentally what I then wrote my PhD thesis on. I did not write on the Second World War and the Holocaust. I wrote on the First World War, which was interesting because that World War was entirely forgotten in Germany.
Yes.
When in the early 2000s, when I tried to explain to others what I was doing, everyone could just come up with the term trench warfare. That was everything. And I compared Germany and Great Britain and in the way those memories were articulated in literature. And then the question is, why are people in Germany no longer thinking of that war experience? Why are they no longer thinking of the Roman time? I guess, except for specialists, of course.
Yes.
I think the reason is Nietzsche's dictum, only what continues to hurt is really strong in the memory.
Okay.
And of course, the Holocaust continues to hurt. And over other things, there are these controversies. No? You will find people who say slavery is very long ago. It's like Roman history. And then there are increasingly people who say slavery continues to hurt, even if I cannot come up with a great-grandmother who can still tell me, I can still feel structural inequalities in my society that I can basically trace back to slavery and a racist regime in Europe in the modern times, and therefore we need to work on this memory.
But even behaviors, ideologies, religions are still influenced by those memories, right?
Absolutely. And of course you could say the further something is back in the past, the less strongly we remember. But I think there is an interesting dynamics in memory culture where things can jump up again, jump through time. The First World War came up again with its centenary 10 years ago. And suddenly there were entirely new perspectives that I hadn't seen in the historiography 10 years earlier. Suddenly it was all about the colonies. How were indigenous people from Australia involved in the First World War? How were Indian soldiers brought to Europe for the First World War? How were African soldiers involved?
Amazing.
Really amazing, because it's not as if society hadn't known that. It's been all in the archive, no? So the historian would probably say, well, that's well researched and it's in the archive, go. But for memory culture, it has disappeared. And then suddenly it was rekindled. So I think we have in memo history, the history of memory, we have something like cold cases that are just remnants of the past. You go to that Roman castle, and then these cold cases can become hot again when we realize that we have a new concern with that particular history, or when we find a new angle to that history. Sometimes you find people who start discussing and debating slavery in ancient Greece, and the representation of slavery or gender in Homer's works. And that is also a way of, we would say, actualizing the past and turning it into a living memory again.
And there's always also new technology coming out that allows us to discover new things, or through different materials or x-rays, or I don't know, even places that we cannot go physically into.
Yeah, I imagine for archaeology, X-ray is important. Then there is the technology of doing genetic analysis of bones that have been in the graves for many, many, many decades, centuries, millennia. So new technologies there. Digital technologies that you have now the possibility to put archives online in an unprecedented way.
Yes.
And that means that more users have access, and that you find a memory-making activity, not just among the specialists who would go to the archive, but exactly, you have people who cut something together, put it on YouTube, and increasingly now you have AI. These can also be faked or cut in ways where you don't know where the materials come from. So we have also cultural memory as a social practice that we need to look at, and we need to see where is this practice helpful and where is this practice getting probably also very problematic.
How important is memory for an individual and all the way up to a country?
Yeah, so memory for the individual is so important in the sense that I couldn't even leave the room if I hadn't memory, if I didn't know what a door is or how to stand up and walk through the door. So we have memory on the individual on levels that psychologists call implicit and procedural, that we need for our everyday navigating.
To function.
Absolute. That we are not aware of. And then there
until it fails.
Absolutely, that's it.
Yeah.
You know. And then we have higher orders of memory. Hang on. And then we have higher orders of memory that we call semantic memory, our knowledge system. So you know that the Romans existed. And autobiographical memory that is based on a system that records our experience. So you remember your first day at school or your first kiss or whatever. So that's what people tend to mean when they say memory, the autobiographical memory.
My father, who was a psychoanalyst, I heard from him quite often the term selective memory.
Yes. Memory, that's the first operation of memory, highly selective. So from what we do here, both of us will remember less than 1% once we leave the room, because all the impressions that we have, the kind of light, the sounds, what is in the room, what exactly am I saying word for word, nobody can keep this all in mind. We won't even do the first step of encoding. So that's basically, it's a flow. And out of that flow, we pick a few things that we encode. Even less probably we will remember or make use of in the future. But that's good, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to function. We would be overwhelmed.
Yes, it would be too much information.
That's it, too much information. Yeah, and why is it important? Even for these higher orders, autobiographical memory gives us a sense of living in time, mentally, that's something that Endel Talving would have said, of doing mental time travels through our lives. Why should we do that? In order to know who we are, to have a relatively stable sense of identity, because we know where we come from, what we did yesterday, what we did in our childhood.
But there's also so many things that we don't know we remember until we need them in some way or another. When I was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years old, I remember that I thought about my father specifically how he knew so many things. I thought, how he really knows so much. And I actually asked him, how do you get to know so many things? Because I was obviously impressed by this. And he said, well, you keep curious, you keep learning, you research. And I said, yeah, but that doesn't really tell me anything. And now that I'm probably older than when my father was then, I have often thought, yeah, so you really get to remember to like to keep a lot of knowledge in your mind, which either it comes out as specific data or information, but then it's also transformed in something that you just apply to do something completely different, maybe.
Yeah, I think in order to remember well, it's always good to be able to connect things. So no, if you have something like a framework in your mind and things seem to fit, you understand what this Roman castle in Germany was because you already have a sense of Roman history, and then you can fit in this new information in a better way, and it will take hold there. That's the one thing.
You connect the dots.
You connect the dots increasingly, which also means that the older you get, the more you have this framework. That also means that you think in certain paths.
Yeah.
No? And are probably, the older you get, less and less able to think out of the box. But you can assimilate new information very well into these established paths. Emotion plays a great role. Curiosity, interest, fascination helps you to remember. And and then there's, of course, the whole world of the ancient mnemotechnics. No? People in the Middle Ages, for example, would have had their particular techniques, like thinking of loci et imagines, certain sites, and connecting certain images with that. So
and now we have the ability to read and write and to print books and to store online, or even now pictures and videos too, which helped us remember. But before this, they either remembered it or it was lost.
That's it. But yeah, and you will have a completely different practice of doing your memory when you have just 2 medieval big books in handwritten manuscripts. You will use them differently. You will probably memorize them and only open them for if you have a certain question and need to reconfirm. And we just read the book, put it aside, read the next book, put it aside. So you also work differently with those mnemonic tools, we would say. I wanted to say one more thing about why is memory important.
Please.
Psychologists and also neuroscientists have recently made the point that we don't just have a memory, we do have a remembering, imagining system. And that means to the extent that I can remember my past experience, can I also project the future, think about the future. So that seems to be one integrated system. If I know what I did yesterday, probably get up, brush my teeth, have breakfast, I can develop a clear sense of what I might be doing tomorrow, exactly the same or something similar, or something that I draw analogies from past to future. And that seems to be one integrated area of remembering and imagining, even it seems, even on the neurological level, probably, even on that substructure where brain structures work with each other. So that it is a mental act that says, okay, this is the past, and this is now my imagination for the future.
And there would be so much more we could go into by conscious and subconscious, whatever happens, regarding the past and creating the future, which is also something really important.
Exactly, and that also then, if you transport that insight to levels of the collectivity and society, how much history does a society need? What kinds of histories or memories do lead to what kinds of future projections? And there are some research is going on right now, especially in cognitive psychology, about that relation between memory and future thinking, they call it.
I've thought several times about how a country or a society is not carrying, not only carrying, but also like pulling like heavy chains about their ancient history. Like I'm thinking, I'm Mexican, so I'm thinking about what happened during when the Spanish arrived in Mexico and mostly erased the native cultures, and what did this implied for the people, and how it still it still guides the way the people behave.
Absolutely, no? You call it ancient history, but probably indigenous people would say, no, it's very present. It's here every day.
It is. Yeah. It is. Just the Mexican president, there was a scandal because she demands that the Spanish king says, I'm sorry because of the conquest.
Exactly.
And who is who to say if this is valid or not, or crazy or sane or justified or whatever.
Absolutely. And that's something that Michael Rosberg calls implication. How are we today implicated into these violent histories? Probably not so much as the result of a biological chain, so that we can trace back our family to conquistadores.
Yeah.
But the way that we inhabit today very rich European countries that might still profit from these seemingly ancient deeds, or where certain social structures are still upheld, no? Where a white European elite has most of the money, of the land also, and indigenous people remain poor.
It is something that causes me a certain amount of conflict, like this global north and global south classification of the world, because in one sense it seems a little bit demeaning of some people, but it is true. It's present, and I don't know how much it influences on. Okay, so you're the global south, and the global south people really feel less, maybe, or not. But so it's a very something that really conflicts me, because I come from a global south country and I'm in a global north country. But I see the difference, and I see how people really behave different, and how it's this first world thing is true, and it's if you can trace it back for centuries how they have behaved differently. If you would make an X-ray in, let's say, 1542, when America was discovered, and you would see how much more advanced the European culture was in most ways than the Native American cultures. So, and before that too, but sometimes we do not know enough to compare them, or which criteria to use to say who was more advanced or so. But
it's a big issue all over the world, no? Histories and how they impact basically social inequalities today. And at the same time, it's not an easy thing to think in a very nuanced way about that, no? Not everybody who is sitting in Europe is somehow guilty. So what kind of responsibility do we have? Then we have internally highly mixed societies, no? Where you find also in the global south extremely wealthy people and extremely poor people. And similar here, you find whole social hierarchies with everything that you may want to wish for, with racism, with cultural racism connected. So yeah, it's not an easy task, but I think it's very important to think in a nuanced way about the legacies of the past and how they are really connected, or how we can think about their presence today.
There is a saying that goes that if you forget your past, you tend to repeat it. And I think Germany does a much better job at remembering the past than Mexico does, especially like in a way of breaking free of these this deconstructive structures and habits and things. So that may be a key role.
So I might have half agreed 5 years ago, but the German situation right now is very fraught again, where forms of racism, anti-Semitism are really swelling up and are very present in public discourse, and nobody knows where this is going. But let's say for that more laudable German memory culture, and that existed in the early 2000s, when I was asked by people from Latin America, former Yugoslavia, or the Spanish, I tended to say, yeah, but Germany is also an easy case. For Germany and the Holocaust, it's absolutely clear who exactly are the perpetrators and who are the victims. It's a very clear case. If you look at Spain and at the Franco regime and at the Civil War, where often in the same family you have perpetrators, you have victims, and you have people who are both perpetrator and victim, things are getting more and more difficult, really, to remember properly.
Yeah, and as you said, how objective are the memories, right? You made me think about the Medici family who held power in Italy for quite a long time, and there were also these good people and bad people and people who took advantage. But maybe this is, or not maybe, this is human nature.
Yeah, I mean, if you say how objective are memories, I am a traditionalist there. I think we should at least strive for extreme historical accuracy. And we do have many tools for that. No? We have archives, we have witnesses whom we can interview multi-perspectively, look at what many different people say about an event. We have advanced technologies in archaeology. So I really think that there needs to be something like a forensic type of memory that really tries to establish what happened as good as we can get at the past. And from there think, what should happen now? What should we remember, and what should we change in our society based on that?
And how much I completely agree with you, but it also makes me think, how much does this real subjective knowledge and reasoning reach like a majority of people?
Yeah, there are many paths that are probably all important. You know, you reach the people if you integrate something into the educational system, when it's clear that every fifth grader reads about that history. You can have a commemorative landscape, you can have museums. As a media scholar, there are these extremely powerful films that are often kitschy and don't tell the whole story, but probably just a kitschy Hollywood story. But they may also help keep a certain memory alive. So I think if a society wants that, there are many paths to channel certain memories.
And media is a wonderful way of doing it, because it certainly reaches more people than formal education. And but then also, so the discourse can be a little bit handled through mass media.
Yeah, I think that people are more open to it because it's the entertainment industry. It's what they do in their free time. So sometimes there are intelligent ways of bringing certain histories to people. I talked about that German miniseries Die Zweiflers yesterday, and I think that's well done. That's well done.
Yeah. There's so much to say about memory, and I think well, what you see in the back is just a few of some of the many events you have. There are, I don't know how many books about memory that you have published, written, edited, and so on. So it's a very important and growing matter.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our wall of fame. And we've been doing this here in Frankfurt at Frankfurt University for 12 years. So it's been a long time, but the people you see are people who are key players in memory studies. And the nice thing is they come from different disciplines. So we talk to historians, sociologists, psychologists, religious scholars, art historians. And that's the great thing about memory studies. It is a interdisciplinary endeavor because we know that memory is not owned by any one discipline. Yeah.
It's a fascinating subject, and I think everybody who hears you can sort of start reflecting and will notice how important it really is, and how in different ways we remember and how we use those memories and so on. So it's something key for humans. So it's really nice talking to you. I will share some more content because I'm sure our audience will be very interested, and perhaps we can talk again, or we can talk to somebody else about it. And I'm really happy that I could finally speak to you, and this very nice chat.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, Rebecca.